Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the local custodians of the land which meet this afternoon and honour elders past, present and emerging. I'm Mel Wilkinson. I sit in the education team at the PHN and welcoming you here today for the Digital Health Foundations. Any questions, we'll have a section at the end. If you pop those questions in at any time in the questions box, Peter will get to those at the end to go through those. So this is your chance to pop those questions in there and have those questions answered that you need. We'll also have a poll, and that's your chance to have input on further topics. We really value your input, and I strongly encourage you to please complete that. It's also being recorded today, and this will be available on our website for you to reference later and to view again, which is proving to be a really helpful resource and well used. Okay, so without further ado now, I'm going to hand over to Peter Mullins. He's from our digital health team. Welcome, Peter, and thank you so much for presenting today. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Mel. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, I'll just share my screen and you might confirm that you can see my slideshow. Can you see that title screen, Mel?
I can see a nice car, and now I can see your, yes, I can see the presentation now.
Excellent. All righty. Okay, well, thank you again, everybody. Sorry, just going to, there we go, just rearranging my screen. Okay, so this afternoon's session that we're going to run through is on cybersecurity, informed consent and privacy. As Mel mentioned, my name is Peter Mullins. I'm a digital health officer with the Primary Health Network. One thing I would like to just cover quickly up front is obviously, look, I don't consider myself a cybersecurity expert and I'm not a lawyer. So the information I'm going to give you today is pretty much general in nature, but I think you'll all find it pretty relevant to the industry. So let's start off with cybersecurity and data security. And who is the threat and why is the health industry such a target at the moment for cybercrime and why is data security so important? Cyber attacks are continually on the rise. We're seeing numbers come up year on year. And that's simply because the value of health information is it's valuable for a number of reasons. But if we look at the sensitivity of the nature of the sensitivity of the information, that obviously adds value to it. There's a couple of other reasons. If you look at the value of a credit card, for example, on the dark web, if you've got your credit card, a number, expiry date, and a CVV number, that's worth about $5 on the dark web. Compare that to a health file, that's worth about $1,000, I believe, at the moment. I'm not in the market, but yeah, that's the value that's quoted by industry sources. And the reason for that difference is if you've got a credit card number and the associated other numbers, obviously you can make purchases, but that's probably going to get picked up and tracked pretty quickly. If you've got a health file that's got name, date of birth, address, phone number, Medicare number, IHI number, as well as sensitive information, you can actually probably create identities from there. So that's the reason for that difference in information. As I mentioned, also health information by its generic nature is sensitive. So there's a lot more value attached to that. Why is this important? Well, health is a target industry for cybercrime. Cyber security experts are basically saying at the moment, it's not a matter of if you get an attack, it's when you get an attack. I saw an article this morning even titled that the health industry is sitting ducks for cyber attacks. So it is something I think we all need to be conscious of and actively looking at and actively monitoring. So let's have a look at data breaches across this sector, across the various sectors. This information's come out of the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, and this is their notifiable data breaches report from July to December 2021. They're about to release another one, but this is the most up-to-date data that we've got at the moment. And you can see that as a health industry, we're winning. That's not a good thing, but it means that we are not good at, we can be better at containing data breaches, and we need to make sure that we're protecting that information that we hold in trust for our patients. Drilling that down a little bit further, you can see that the sort of data breaches that we're talking about and how they're being perpetrated or how they're coming about. Malicious or criminal attacks making up 55%, system fault about 4%, and human error 41%. Now, system fault, probably not a lot we can do about that. other than maintaining our systems the best way we can. The other two, I think, the influences that we can have on those either through cyber protection and also training, the human error, letting people understand how they can actually take part and help protect your business or your agency or your practice against cyber attacks. I think the other thing is that bear in mind that these breaches that I'm showing you here are only the reportable breaches, and we will talk a bit more about what's a reportable breach and what's not a reportable breach towards the end of the presentation. I think, you know, this is just a snapshot of those particular reportable breaches. Drilling down again a little bit further and looking at those cyber attacks and the incidents, 173 notifications altogether. Brute force made up 5% of those, malware 3%, phishing scams 32%, compromised or stolen credentials unknown 28%, and ransomware 23%, hacking 8%. I think if we look at the 28% compromised, stolen, and unknown, look, I think they're probably going to be either phishing or brute force attacks that weren't identified. It's just they didn't know the cause of those, but they're making up a great percentage of those things. Why is that important? You know, phishing scams, obviously, that's phishing is where, you know, you get an email that's purporting to be something, you know, click here, you've won $5 million, or Coles have sent you a prize. We get them every day in our home emails. We get them sometimes at work. That's the sort of thing we're talking about with a phishing attack. Brute force attack is where they're using, you know, somebody is actually trying to physically, or not physically, but in a cyber way, actually break your computer credentials. So let's have a look at a little bit more of those. So again, as I mentioned, phishing attack is that sort of, you get an email, you get a text message, something like that, where they're looking to actually access your system and get you to click on a link that's going to take you to potentially an insecure website. Might be a spoofing website, you know, might purport to be the Commonwealth Bank or purport to be some other's website, and the websites look very convincing, but they're actually a spoof website, which is just a fake website. Malware, again, they may introduce malware on your system. Malware may sit on your system and may track keystrokes. It may, you know, develop into other sorts of things where they can track what you're actually doing, or it may just, you know, give someone may create a backdoor entrance into your system. Brute force attack, as I mentioned, that's actually a multiple attack on your system, where, you know, someone's using a bank of computers or a supercomputer or even just a normal computer, and they're actually continually trying to break your credentials. So that's trying to break your passwords and your user logins. And obviously compromised and stolen credentials can come through that as well. You know, if someone gains access to your system and you've got that information stored in there in an Excel spreadsheet or in a Word document, that may be a way someone can get hold of your credentials. So collectively, they make up about 75%, and I know these numbers vary a little bit because they're coming from different sources, but I think the important thing is to look at where are they coming from. As I said, phishing attacks, 43% of that, brute force attacks, 8%, and compromised or stolen credentials, 24%. Now, how do we mitigate those? Obviously, web filtering, making sure that your security software is actually looking at what websites can your team go to. Is it blocking unsecure sites? Is it blocking sites that don't have the necessary security certificate or something like that? Email filtering, again, making sure that emails that are of a suspicious nature are either getting quarantined, put in the junk, and not actually coming through to the inbox. And the staff are actually also actively reviewing and playing a part in that. I think that's important as well. Strong password policies, very important. And that's what brute force attacks are looking at, really. They're trying to break those passwords that aren't very secure. So having a strong password policy is important, and we'll cover a little bit more on that. Two-factor authentication, that's important as well. Yeah, if you log in, for example, into your NetBank, you'll put in your password, your username, but then you'll get a text message giving you a secondary code that you've got to put in to access it. Same as accessing your Parental account, it works the same way. With our system here at the PHN, if I log in from a different computer into my Office 365 account, it'll send a verification, it'll ask me to verify that on my mobile, and that's a secondary authentication. Interesting anecdote. I saw this meme in a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and I was logged on remotely to a specialist practice last week, helping them do a little bit of work. And one of the things that came up was they had to actually reset their password. So we talked a little bit about password security, and I gave them the parameters of the password that it had to be 8 digits, minimum of 8 digits, sorry, mix of uppercase, lowercase, and a number or a symbol to try and make it a complex password. So they put the password, and they said nobody will ever guess my password. And I said, it's funny, I saw a meme the other day in a presentation. I said, you know, somebody figured out my password, now I've got to rename my dog. They said, my God, that's what I used as my password, my dog's name. So let's look at the 30 most used passwords in the world. Now, this may not be an up-to-date list, but I think you've all seen these passwords used. These are what people think are passwords. They're not passwords. Password is not a password. Password 1 is not a password. Number 18 there on the list, you know, ZAQ12WS looks sort of complex, but if you all glance down at your keyboard that's probably in front of you, I think you'll see where that comes from. So our staff are not good at setting passwords. We're not good at setting passwords a lot of the time. We've got to maintain a lot of passwords, and I think that's where the problem comes in. So there's things we need to be able to do to manage those passwords. So why are strong passwords or complex passwords important? We can see here, if you've got even a 5-digit password, it's got a mix of uppercase, lowercase, a brute force attack is going to break that instantly. And if you think of a brute force attack, you've probably heard the old axiom of, you know, if you put a group of monkeys in a room with a set of typewriters, they'll bang out War and Peace eventually. That's essentially the way that a brute force attack works. It's just continually trying different password parameters to try and break that password. You can see how quickly they're, even at 8 digits, it's only going to take them eight hours to do that. So if you've got something driving at your system overnight, you'll come back in the morning and you've had a brute force attack. You can see there, though, the lesson, I suppose, in this slide really is the more complex and the more letters, the more complex and the more number of characters that you use, the stronger that password's going to be. And you can see even down at, you know, 12 characters, mix of uppercase, lowercase, letters, numbers, symbols. It's going to take them 34,000 years to break. So I think you're probably safe at that level. The $64 question is, how do you manage that? I would suggest if you had a look at how many passwords we're all trying to maintain as individuals, whether that be work, home, you've probably got 30 to 50 passwords that the average person's using. You know, you've got streaming services, you've got all your work apps that you use. You've got your bank apps, all the different things. So the best way to manage those and to keep them complex is to actually use password manager software. And you can get that at enterprise level. And I think that's important. You've got to be using all your cybersecurity software needs to be at enterprise level. There's no point using, you know, basic home level software for cybersecurity. But password managers are important. That way you've only got to remember one password, and I won't go too much into the detail of how they work, but I would suggest it's worth looking at either as individuals or at a corporate level. The other one was ransomware. So what is ransomware? Ransomware is really just a type of malware that's designed to prevent or limit access to a user's system by locking their screen or locking up their files until the ransom is paid. And usually that ransom, they'll ask for that, you know, in Bitcoin or something like that, deposit money here. So you put the money in, you're still no guarantee of getting your files back, or that you're going to get them back without, you know, without being corrupted or anything like that. So how do you mitigate against that? Web filtering, again, making sure staff are aware, email filtering, making sure that they're not clicking on things that come through their emails, just clicking away happily. Make sure staff are continually trained and continually reminded to have a think about what they're actually doing rather than just clicking blindly. Application whitelisting, again, making sure with your IT provider that your staff are only allowed to use those applications that they're actually authorized to use, and they're not downloading other software that may potentially contain malware. And having a business continuity and disaster recovery plan in place is vital. As I mentioned earlier, experts are saying it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So if it happens, or sorry, when it happens, you need to have your plan in place. Now, backups is one way of actually obviously mitigating that risk, but a lot of malware or malware that's designed for ransomware, they'll actually put a delay into it. So they factor in that you're going to back up probably once a day, once a week. Hopefully you're doing it once a day. That they'll actually do that, and the malware won't actually release itself, or the ransomware won't actually release itself until it's giving you time to do a backup or two, and that way your backup is also infected. So just be aware you've got to have all of these things in place and have a work with your IT suppliers to actually make sure that you've got a backup plan in place and that it's tested. And actually, on the subject of ransoms, the Australian Cyber Security Centre actually recommends don't pay the ransom. So that's why it's vital, because you can pay the money and you're no guarantee that you're going to get anything back in return. So let's have a look at the top 5 sectors reporting ransomware attacks. And this is again from the Australian Cyber Security Centre and their cyber threat report from 2021. Thankfully, healthcare is not winning there, but you can see we're number 2. So again, why is that? Sensitive information that people want to keep secure, and they're probably potentially willing to pay. And this is not, we're not talking only at large organisations. We're talking at, this happened, a hospital in Victoria was targeted last year, and it'll come down to individual, solo practitioner practices. The cyber criminals aren't picky and choosy. They'll just go where they think the money is. So, and some may target large, some may target small. Everyone in the industry, I think, is a target, and I think we just need to be very, very aware of that and proactive in our management of it. So let's have a little bit more of a look at that. So security software, is it fit for purpose and is it updated? So as I mentioned, are you using enterprise level software? It's important that your software is actually fit for purpose, that it does what you need to do, and it's scaled or scalable to your organizational size. As that grows, you'll need to make sure that is still fit for purpose. Secure messaging, again, vital. If you're communicating between providers, how are you doing that? Are you using a secure messaging platform? In the health industry, you've got HealthLink, you've got Argus, you've got Medical Objects, to mention a few. They're vital. Email is not a communication method that we should be using in the health industry. Not for patient data, sorry, I should clarify that. Also, are you receiving encrypted e-referrals? So do they come in via, those other secure messaging services? In the Hunter New England part of our primary health network footprint, we've actually got a joint project been running for the last 6 years with the local health district. We've got a secure e-referral program called Sent e-referrals. About 90% of general practices across the region have access to that software and can actually generate those e-referrals. And it's actually also a clinical decision-making tool. So that's a way of receiving e-referrals from general practice into your system, and you receive those there encrypted, and they're safe and secure, and they're point-to-point, so they're not going to go astray in the middle. And that's why I mentioned email. The problem with emails is, you don't know what you're going to get in it, so you don't know where an email is going to go. We've all typed up the email and auto-filled the receiver, and all of a sudden it's gone to somebody else because we've just haven't checked properly who we're actually sending that email to. And we see that all the time. I used to manage a general practice. I've seen emails go to wrong staff within the practice. I've seen emails go to wrong providers outside of the practice. So it's important that we look at what information we're sending by email. As an aside, the RACGP, the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, rates email communication for patient data as extremely high risk, and it's actually something that general practices shouldn't be doing. So we really shouldn't be asking practices to email us patient data in an email. It should come via secure messaging. Faxes or e-faxes is another area that's interesting. A lot of us are obviously struggling. Faxes, 1980 type technology, it don't play nicely with the NBN. So a lot of us are looking for an alternative to a physical fax machine, and a lot of practices or a lot of businesses are transitioning to an e-fax because, as you know, the health industry, we still love our fax machines. The problem with e-faxes is a lot of us don't realise, while that transmission between point to point might occur as an encrypted TIFF file, which is the protocol that most fax machines use, when it gets to your software that you're using for your e-fax, generally what that will do is convert that TIFF file to a PDF, throw it up to your email server, and then throw it into your email inbox. So essentially, at your end, and probably at the receiving end of that fax, is an email. And so we go back to the previous point: how secure is your email system, and are you, or should you be using emails for patient data? So I think it's important. If you're hosting your own, web mail server, probably less of an issue. But if you're using an Office 365 environment, then that's patient data is being stored on Microsoft servers, and most of us probably don't even know whether that's in Australia, where that is in the world, and obviously it's Microsoft to keep it as safe as possible, but it's where that data is and what's happening to it in transit. Remote access is another one. You know, it can be an easy backdoor for cybercrime. A lot of us are working from home. I'm sitting here at beautiful Port Stephens, but if we're using remote access to remote in, where are people remoting in from, and is that secure? If you've got a staff member who's not using a corporate asset or a company asset, they're using their own computer to remote in onto your system, do you know what software they're running? You know, if they're running Windows 8 Home with a AVG freeware as their cybersecurity, you've probably got a problem in that area. So it's important to know who's actually got access to your system and how they're actually accessing that. So I think it's important, you know, and really worth considering supplying corporate assets where you can actually control the security of those assets and the access that they have. And I've mentioned it a couple of times, are your staff trained and regularly updated in regard to cybersecurity? Do they know when they open an email and it's coming from a supplier or from something they don't recognize immediately? Are they empowered to pick up the phone and ring and confirm that? Do they know if they hover over, you know, a link in an email, but down in the bottom of the screen, it'll actually show them the address that it's taking it to? That's how you can identify a spoofing site. You know, and do they just automatically click because they're not aware of those sorts of things? If you get an email in that says, you know, here's your bill from supplier X, do they know that that's actually not one of your suppliers? You know, have you got a dedicated email set up for accounts at, you know, business name here, so that all of your supplier emails, all of the supplier invoices go to that dedicated email, and if something comes into reception or something comes into a clinician, they know that's not real, they can just delete it. So those sorts of things, but regularly just bringing it to front of mind. You don't need to tell them what the current threat is, what the name of the current threat is, just keeping it front of mind for them and having them think about what they're receiving, because they will receive those emails regularly. I got one the other day, just last week, from a specialist practice, said, here, I want to share this file with you via SharePoint. First thing I did was pick up the phone, ring the practice, said, I think you've been hacked, because I don't think you wanted to share a file with me. So it's making sure that, one, you're letting another provider know they've been hacked, but also, yeah, making sure that staff aren't just clicking on the first thing that comes into their inbox. User permissions is another important area of cybersecurity. Who in your business can actually download and install a program? On the other side, do the user permissions allow staff to work effectively within their job scope? So it's a balancing act between the two, but you know your frontline staff probably don't need to be able to download and actually install a program, because if they click on a link and download a program, that's potentially risky. They're potentially installing something with malware. So if that's blocked by your system, that's one level of protection you've got. On the other side, you do need people with administrator level access within a business so that the business can actually function properly. So yeah, it's important to know what permissions they've actually got within their scope. Software, again, a pretty basic one, but you'd be surprising how many businesses delay updating their software because there's a cost in rolling it out, and there's time involved with rolling it out. But don't unduly delay any software upgrades. Generally, that you know, software, whether it's your clinical software, your operating system, BIOS drivers. BIOS is just a firmware for your computer. Make sure they're updated, because they'll contain security patches and they'll help protect you against those latest threats. So you don't need to know what they are, you just need to keep your system up to date. Backups, I mentioned a little bit earlier. Are they done daily and are they stored offsite? I would suggest any health business that isn't doing daily backups and doesn't have them stored offsite is putting themselves at risk. It does happen. The March floods up in Lismore, I know one of the general practices up there lost their server and their backup because they were both on site. So it is imperative that your backup is stored offsite. Now that can be a cloud backup, it can be an external drive, depending on what your preference is, what your need is. I'm not going to advocate for one or the other, but it's important that you've got that. I mentioned a secondary server there. Again, if you're a business and you're superseding a server, consider if your other server is actually still serviceable, consider using that as a backup server so that it actually runs slightly behind your primary server and it'll actually back up. We had at a practice I managed, we had one running about 8 to 10 minutes behind the primary server. That meant if we had a server failure, we could be back up and running pretty quickly with current data. So that's something worth considering as well. I'm not advocating you go out and buy a secondary server. I know, servers aren't cheap, so I'm definitely not advocating that. But if the opportunity presents, it's certainly worth considering. The other vital thing is, I think I mentioned earlier as well, have you tested your data recovery? Your data recovery plan must be in place, and you must test it. There's no good getting, server goes over, you've got to set back up, and all of a sudden you find out your backup, you can't actually recover from a backup. So you need to work with your IT providers to make sure that that backup will actually work and that you can get back up and running, and that's an active test, and that should be done, I would suggest, at least twice a year. Policies and procedures. As a commission service provider, part of the contract that we have with you is that you have to have a digital health access policy in place. Now, forgive me, I'm going to look away from the screen and read this off my notes, but the policy should cover aspects of digital health that are relevant to your individual organisation, including but not limited to data safety and governance, cyber security, privacy, electronic communication, and data security. And there's some information about that in that provider information pack that we sent out to you as part of that contract. But there's some others I think that you need to, possibly consider. And as the wording there says, it's not limited to that. So having, I've listed some here, again, a privacy policy, My Health Record security and access policy. If you're accessing the My Health Record, that's a must-have. That's part of that actual setup process. You confirm you've got that. Secure messaging policy, social media policy, email and internet, data records, and password policy. They're all just examples. And again, that's not an exhaustive list either. The other important thing I think with policies is, do you actually walk the walk? It's easy to talk the talk. We've all got policies, but are they actually living documents, or do they sit on a shelf gathering dust? Do you use your policy documents, and with new staff coming in, do they know where to find that policy? Are they introduced to it and have that explained to them? Staff need to know the framework with which they work in, and your policies are a great way to be able to explain that to them, and for them to be able to refer back and say, okay, yep, am I doing the right thing with this? So I think that's really important. So make sure your policies are active documents and that you're actually doing what your policy says you do. IT consultants and suppliers, regardless of the size of your business, obviously most enterprise level or corporate size businesses have either an internal team or an external, they'll contract someone to do that work. I would suggest in most health businesses, unless you're an IT expert, you really need to be contracting your IT work to an external supplier, particularly or preferably probably someone who's got some health industry experience, because a lot of our different IT and software packages actually require a certain level of expertise to actually run those. Not always easy to find, but it's worth looking to and seeing if you can find that. But does your IT consultant work with you? It's an important thing that you, as either a business manager, know what's happening with your IT, and that you actually get that information rather than just get sent an invoice. I think that's vital. You need to know what's going on. You actually need to be driving that in some senses. And also, do you or your manager know your IT administrator passwords? Again, if your IT provider wins lotto and they're off to the Bahamas tomorrow, can you actually get somebody else in very quickly and actually get up and running without having to blow up your system and start again? So it's important that as a business, you know those administrator level passwords and have access to those, preferably stored in a password manager software. If you don't know those passwords and your IT provider is reluctant to give them to you, I'd probably ask the question, does your IT consultant work for you, or are you working for them? Okay, enough on cybersecurity. Let's move on to informed consent. And again, I put this slide up, but I'm going to just read it because I think it's a really good definition that I've stolen from Avant. Avant are one of the Medicare legal insurers that are available in the industry. My background is general practice, so I've fallen back to there, but I think all of these concepts that I share, while I've picked some of it up from general practice, that they apply equally across any health service business that we work in. So importantly, consent is not about getting a signature on a form. Rather, it's about a process of shared decision making. As another colleague recently put it, the thing we need to understand about informed consent is that it's about the conversation, not the form. It's not about a tick list to ensure that you've disclosed every conceivable risk. It's about understanding the patient and what is materially relevant to her or him and working through that with that patient. And I think that's really good and something we really need to understand. So what are the three aspects of consent, or informed consent? Sorry, capacity. Who can give informed consent? Disclosure. what information does your patient need to be able to make an informed decision? And voluntariness. Are they actually giving consent freely? So capacity, let's break that down a little further. Having decision-making capacity means that the patient can understand the facts that are involved, understand the choices that they're being given, weigh up the consequences of those choices, understand how those consequences affect them, and then communicate their decision. So it breaks it down quite nicely there, I think. And I think, you know, if we're looking at that, and then the graphic I've got there, informed consent is more than just a signature. I think that's what it is. Informed consent is part of that relationship with your patient. So disclosure, clinician needs to discuss a procedure or a proposed treatment and provide information in regard to any associated benefits and risks as they relate to the patient. Fairly straightforward in that. But disclosure can also involve financial, treatment-based risks, anything like that. Really should be anything that's relevant needs to be disclosed to the patient. And then voluntariness. The patient must be free to make the decision in regard to a procedure or treatment without undue pressure and influence. So I think that's important as well, that they're not under pressure to make that decision. They're making it of their own free will. So let's have a look at how that applies to children and minors, and when a child can actually provide consent, child or minor, sorry. So the basic law in Australia presumes competence for capacity for a child to make a decision or transition to an adult at age 18, although in South Australia that's age 16. So that's the legal, the statutory age. However, and this is where it becomes nice and grey, before reaching 18 years of age, or 16 in South Australia, a child can be deemed a mature minor, and that's referred to as competent. So now the grey age for that is roughly around age 14. That's the age that is often referred to, but it's a case-by-case basis. You may have a 14-year-old that's very mature, you might have a 16-year-old that's very immature. So it's a case-by-case basis, but essentially that means that they can take control of their own decision-making prior to age 18 or prior to age 16 if you as a clinician determine them to be GILEC competent. Now, when deciding if a child's GILEC competent, obviously the clinician needs to consider the child's age, the proposed nature of the treatment or procedure, or the decision they're being asked to make, and their understanding of it and the possible side effects. So if it's something fairly simple, a mature minor may be able to make that decision. Something very complex, you may say, no, actually you're not at that maturity level to be able to make that. And again, that's got to come down to a case-by-case decision with you talking to your patient about what you're actually proposing, or what their situation is. At Medicare, let's have a look at Medicare, for example. At age 14, parents no longer have access to their child's Medicare claims history online. So the child's Medicare history will disappear, even though they'll be on the parent's Medicare card and they can stay there. Well, one of my colleagues said their partner is actually 28 years of age, still on their parents' Medicare card. So they will stay there, but at age 14, parents can no longer see the Medicare claims history. Children can get their own card at age 15. Don't ask me why there's a year's difference between the two. Medicare has a lot of unexplained issues. Anyway, I won't go there. My health record. So a parent or guardian will have control over their child's My Health record until they turn age 14. At that age, the child can then, and it says if they can prove to the Digital Health Agency that they're a mature minor, basically by applying, I think that's essentially how that will happen. They'll have control over their own My Health record. So at age 14, a child's parents and guardians are automatically removed from the My Health record. And children can give access back to the parents for that. Now that comes as a surprise to a lot of parents who have 18 in their mind and aren't aware of GILEC competency. I know I've had that discussion with a lot of parents over the years. No, your child is 14. They actually have the right to control their own record and make decisions in regard to what actually happens, who can see whether it be their My Health record, their patient file at your practice or your business. That's up to them once if you deem, or they are deemed, a mature minor. So let's have a look at clinicians and My Health record. Do you need a patient's consent to access the My Health record? And the simple answer to that is no, you don't. The legislative framework that was developed for the My Health record actually allows healthcare providers to access, if you're part of the patient's care team, to access the My Health record, whether that be upload information, download information, view information. You actually don't need a patient's consent to do that. By them having a My Health record, that is your consent. That said, best practice and consent, talk to the patient about why you want to access that record. Make them part of that discussion so that they're aware of what's going on. Talk to them about the benefits of you being able to, look at potentially what their dispense history is for medications, what their discharge summary that from a recent hospital stay, because they won't necessarily know what information is contained in that. If you're a secondary clinician, a general practitioner may get the discharge summary electronically. Chances are you won't, but that discharge summary may have some vital information because you've been treating that patient for a while. You don't know what was involved in that hospital stay, but you can get that information from a discharge summary. So that's the advantage of having access to My Health record. We often hear people say, but there's not enough information in there. I would argue if we don't all participate in it, then there'll never be enough information in there. So I think as healthcare, or as health providers and health clinicians and participants in the industry, we all need to play a part in that, because that's the only way it will grow and become more valuable over time. But I'll get off my soapbox now. Parental control of the patient control of their My Health record. So patients can actually have a lot of control over their My Health record. They can actually block access to the record for particular providers or any provider. So they can put a PIN number on that, and the only way that a provider can access that if they've got that PIN number. They can actually also block individual documents. They can block individual reports. They can block individual dispense records. So they can actually go through, and it's quite a simple process. Once they've logged into their My Health record, they just go to that particular page and they can actually put blocking controls on. They can also have notifications when their My Health record is accessed, so they can get an SMS notification or an email notification telling them that their My Health record has been accessed. And I've got that on mine. If My Health record is ever accessed, I get an SMS message that tells me where it's been accessed. So you can track that as a patient, and that gives you that information. The other thing I should mention there's some very strong legislation that comes in behind the My Health record for improper access. So if you're a health clinician and you're not part of the care team and accessing someone's My Health record, there is very, very strong legislation to cover that, and substantial fines and potentially jail time. So I think it's very important to make sure that patients are aware that the security that sits behind their My Health record, it's a very secure system. It's got military grade security in it, and there are strong protections in place for people's records, and they've actually got, and that's why they call it a personally controlled record, because it is actually the patient controller. They can actually also delete the record at any time. But again, My Health record can be a valuable tool. I worked with a doctor who worked in a drug and alcohol facility, a rehab facility. They used to use the My Health record as part of that trust process. If the patient was blocking their access to those dispense records, that was a red flag for them. They would be saying, well, why would I prescribe when I can't see what other medications you've actually had dispensed to you? So it can be, it can be part of the process, and I think that's where we need to think of it as clinicians. It's not the be all and end all of information, but it can provide some really good information as a clinician. So privacy. The Privacy Act 1988 was introduced to promote and protect privacy of individuals and to regulate how Australian government agencies and organisations with an annual turnover of more than $3 million and some other organisations handle personal information. So that's people's personal data. We don't turn over more than $3 million. Basically, those companies or those organisations under the $3 million threshold relates to any health service. So if you're on this webinar today, it'll relate to you. So I won't go into that any further, but that's just how it should. That's how it is. The privacy principles relate to all of us. So your privacy policy, what should it outline? It should outline how you collect the data, what data you're collecting, and how you'll treat that data and who has access to it. Now that information should be available on your website generally, and also as something that patients can actually pick up in your practice or in your business. Right of access to information that you collect. Your patients actually have a right of access to their information, to their health file under privacy legislation. So that means that at any time they can come to you as a health provider and say, I would like to see my file, and you have an obligation to provide that information to them, regardless of what information is contained on that file. The only reason for not providing that is there is a definition that says only in cases where there is a case of potential for extreme harm. Now, extreme harm is not defined in the Act, and it's a case-by-case basis, but you have to be able to defend that, and really, there are not a lot of defences for it, but there's a lot of ways that you can actually manage that as well. If you're concerned about your patient having access to some of that information, that you're worried that they may interpret that because they don't have clinical information, have a talk to your patient. Why, try and understand why it is that they're wanting to actually access that information. I found a lot of the times when I've had that conversation with patients that are actually moving and actually want to take it to a new clinician. So then you can explain to them, well, we can actually transfer that for you, maybe do that electronically, which is going to be safer, and actually mean a better record at the other end. It may be that they actually just want to see what is written on their file. Some people like to understand that they have that right, but it may be you don't have to print the file out and hand them a great wad of paper. You may be able to actually go through it and talk to them about, okay, this is what this means. In the health industry, we use lovely terms like a non-compliant patient, which can be quite confronting to a patient to see that. We know that just means it's somebody who's not good at taking their meds. But a non-compliant patient, can be something quite confronting for a patient to see that. Or the way we would just might describe it, an overweight patient, a non-compliant obese patient, a little bit confronting. But so we need to be able to talk and contextualise why that information is in there. So I think that's important when we're looking at patient rights or patients accessing information. But at the end of the day, they do have right to that information. And the other thing is, it's the whole file. So if you receive information from a GP or from a specialist, and that specialist letter says on it, this information is only intended for the recipient only and cannot be passed on to a third party, wrong. The general understanding at the moment is from the medical insurers is that if it's on the file, it's part of the patient record, the patient has access to it. So always be careful about what you write on a patient file and what you put. Always be very professional about what's put in a letter. I know most people are, but just be careful about that because you might have a receptionist that types something, this patient's pain in the, and you don't want that to be part of the file. Right of access to information collected by third parties, and I think this comes up a lot. A lot of people are concerned with the My Health record, for example, that employers might be able to access it, insurers might be able to access it, law enforcement agencies might be able to access it, partners, spouses, children, parents, depending on the age of the child, of course. Pretty much nobody has access to a My Health record or to a patient's medical information or a patient's data without having a valid authority. Now, a valid authority can be consent by the individual, where they are able to consent, looking at child's age, etc. It could be a subpoena coming through from a court, things like that. That's where that information can be accessed. But in the main, nobody has access to that information. So if patients are worried about somebody might be able to see, if you're a mental health clinician and you're putting information on a patient's My Health record regarding their current treatment or something like that, an employer cannot access that information. If it's a third-party claim, they can't access that information. So I think it's important to, again, it's part of that talking to your patient, talking to your client about why that information is important, why you think that's sharing, and that all adds into that continuity of care. I've seen patients that are very transient, and the My Health record is actually the one record that is actually able for them to move with them between their different care providers. So it is important that information does go up there. Just continuing on that, a lot of people tend to think in New South Wales, where you've got a power of attorney, that you've got access to health information or an enduring power of attorney. No, you don't. Power of attorney gives you permission to make financial and legal decisions for the person that you're acting as the attorney. An enduring power of attorney actually only comes into play when they lose capacity to make those decisions themselves. So I think that's important to recognise as well. So I've had people front up to me and say, I've got a power of attorney, I want to see my mother's medical file. Sorry, you can't. Guardianship, enduring guardianship, same thing in New South Wales. An enduring guardianship only provides for access after the individual loses capacity. It doesn't entitle you access to, for example, I'm an enduring guardian for my mother. I can't go and access her medical file until she loses capacity to manage her own affairs. So if I wanted to access that file, she has to give me permission. And with all of these things and with all these consents, I should have mentioned earlier, make sure it's documented. If you're not taking a form, and it doesn't have to be a form, but if you're documenting consent, document it in contemporaneous notes and make sure that it's in the file. Because if it's not there, it didn't happen. I mentioned access without consent can occur through subpoena, subpoena, summons, and there are certain legislative situations or emergency situations. For example, the My Health Record has a break glass feature. So if you're a patient and you're in an emergency ward and you've got a My Health Record and they want to get access to information and you can't give them either your own health information or you can't consent to that, then the clinicians do have the facility to be able to break the glass. That is tracked, that will be recorded, and it will be questioned, but obviously there is that feature there, and that's one of those emergency situations. Other situations that come up, there are things where there's a risk of severe harm to the patient and things like that. We do allow clinicians sometimes to step outside those consent boundaries. So notifiable breaches or data breaches, and I talked a little bit earlier about this. A data breach occurs when personal information is accessed or disclosed without authorization or is lost. If the Privacy Act, as we mentioned, covers your organisation or agency, you must notify affected individuals and the agency when a data breach occurs involving personal information that's likely to result in serious harm. Now, serious harm again is not really defined in the Act. It's a bit grey, but you know, it's a matter of looking at every data breach in its own merits. And I often use the terminology, every data breach is a potential notifiable event, but not every data breach is a notifiable event. I've put there, the graphic there shows the guide to managing data breaches in accordance with the Act. It's a great resource, but I think it's a matter of when your staff need to know when an event might occur, when they've actually contributed to an event, when they've actually been part of an event, because you have to actually record each of those in an incident register and then provide details of the investigation that you did, and that will take you through that. That guide is actually on the OAIC website, and it's a really valuable resource. So if you don't have that, I would suggest having a look at it. Make yourself familiar with what is a notifiable breach, and when do you actually have to do it. As I mentioned, not every breach, you know, when you go through that process, it will look at what information was disclosed. Was it just a phone number? Was it just an address? Was it a whole health file? Was it your whole database for the health files? Was that breach contained? So where did that information go? Were you able to retrieve the information? Was it one document that went to another healthcare provider? Should have gone to specialist A, it went to specialist B. That's probably not a notifiable breach. Again, I'm not going to try and interpret each breach, but that information is it's gone to a health professional who understands the obligations of the Privacy Act, and you've been able to contain that breach. Probably going to be able to manage that without making it a notifiable breach. But the guide gives you some really good steps to go through and actually follow that process through. So be aware that's part of your obligations under the Act, that you do actually have to follow that process through in any breach of data. Sorry, and I've got that website there. That will come up in the presentation. The presentation will be put onto into our education library after this, and you'll be able to access that information. And these resources are also there. So the Digital Health Agency's got some really good information for healthcare providers on all sorts of digital, on a range of digital health products, whether that be secure messaging, whether that be the My Health Record, e-prescribing, all those sorts of things are on there. The My Health Record, again, has a dedicated area for health professionals and some really good resources. The Office of the Australian Information Commissioner is there. Again, understanding the Act, some really good fact sheets around patient accessing information and things like that. Australian Cyber Security Information Commissioner, again, some good information there on what are the current trends, what's happening. I put a VANT there. There's a number of medical indemnity insurers around. I just used a VANT. That was one I was familiar with. MDA National is another one. The RACGP, some good resources there. And while they're a GP-centric organisation, they've got policy templates and things like that. Very easy to pick templates up and actually drop them into your own business. Change the word GP, general practice, to your own practice. And you can use those resources. It saves you reinventing the wheel. The same with the Allied Health Professionals Australia website. They've got, under their resources section, they've got some templates there for digital health policy and some really good resources there as well. So you don't need to go and reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of these resources that are out there and available. So look, and if you can't find any of those, don't hesitate to get in touch with myself through the PHN. More than happy to help point you in the right direction. Well, that's it for me. I might throw it open to questions now. I might stop sharing my screen.
Thanks so much, Peter. Thank you. Lots of content was covered there. So far, we don't have any questions, but I'm going to give everybody a minute or so just to pop those in if you've got the questions box there. If you think of any after the webinar finishes, please send them through to education@thephn.com.au. So it looks like you've covered everything, Peter. There's none coming through. It's always a great sign. Well done. And just a reminder to everyone, the poll will pop up after the session, and a copy of the presentation and this recording will be available in the Education Library in the coming days. So I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Peter. Got through heaps of content today. That's great. And really appreciate everyone being here. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.